Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Time to get started. Ms. Bird, would you call the roll, please?
Council President Suzanne Souter.
Here.
Councilperson Nerman Zubaka.
Here.
Councilperson Andrew Zelt.
Here.
Councilperson Brian Madaway.
Here.
Absent is Councilperson Joseph Day. Also present, City Administrator Anthony Tantillo, City Clerk and Finance Coordinator Courtney Taylor, and City Treasurer James Wissman.
Well, as the agenda says, this is a preliminary discussion regarding the county reassessment and its impact on our budget and some other general things about the budget. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ms. Tantillo at this point, and then she has some guests to give us some further information.
Thank you. So I just wanted to start this budget season and provide an overview of the steps that we're going to take this year for the FY26 budget. And then we have a wonderful presentation by the University of Delaware undergraduates who have been working on a revenue project for us since February after the semester began. So my presentation is very brief. It will discuss the implementation of the county's reassessment on the city. A quick overview of the timeline for the FY26 budget season. We'll begin the budget season today with this brief introduction, and next week we will have a presentation of the budget for FY26 proposed. Following that, we will have a meeting the week after where council can provide feedback, request any additional funds, or just have a relative discussion, and we will hopefully adopt a resolution to adopt the rollback tax rate, which I'll get into a little further in the next couple slides. Then at the beginning of June, we will present the final budget, and then we have a couple meetings on the books. Hopefully we won't need them all, where we'll work through the finalization of the budget and adopt the new tax rate version. Go to the next slide. I have a comparison of the existing versus new tax rate. As you know, and as we've discussed many times, the county last did their assessment in 1983. The city has adopted in our charter the county assessment, so that's what we use. The current assessed value is $260,648,423. The county reassessment is approximately $1,290,661,167. These values are not finalized by the county and they're still working through appeals. The numbers will be finalized in July. So we know that there are some people who have appealed the amount that the county has assessed. So there's a at-risk amount that we are at risk of losing. So we have incorporated that into this assessed value overall, just so we can have a better picture of what we're looking at in terms of the overall assessed value. Those appeals should be done by the time the county finalizes their assessment, and we should have better information at that time. They are expected to do that by July 1st.
Do you have any idea of how many are being appealed within our community?
About 40? It was 42. Yeah, 42 to 41. Thank you. So with this existing versus new tax assessment, we of course have our property tax revenue. The current tax rate that we have is $1.20, and based on the assessed value, our tax revenue, property tax revenue, is $3,100,000, and that's what we're expected to receive with this fiscal year. The requirement for the adoption of the new assessment is to roll back the rate. So the $1.20 tax rate has to be rolled back to something equitable to that same tax revenue with the new assessed values. So with that, we project that the rollback tax rate will be 0.240187. Very much lower number, but that equates to the same tax revenue of $3,100,000. And again, these are not final, but these are the numbers that we have, best assessed thus far. And then finally, we once we roll back the amounts, we will have to. Sorry about that. We will have to review the tax revenue with our needs, versus, for the revenue versus expenses of the budget that we are gonna propose, and then suggest a new potential tax rate that we may need to increase, or decrease, depending on our needs. So that's kind of an overview of what we'll do this season. You have any questions thus far? Yes.
So do we have like percentages of how many went up, went down? Like a breakdown, went up like 25%, 40%, and then gone down, so we can understand the impact that's happening within our community?
Yeah, we can have more detailed discussions once we talk about what the rollback rate will definitely be, and then the potential increase or decrease rate, the new rate will be. But we can certainly have those numbers available for you.
Yeah, I don't know the breakdown myself, but I can, just by looking at the total assessed value, on average, at least, properties went up by 5 times, right? So,
Yeah.
Right.
but we were looking about probably like 500%, right? So like this. So, yeah, there could be
Well,
houses that went up or less than that, but, just an average, looking there, seems like about five times.
I'm looking to understand is, in our community, how many have actually gone up and overpaying more in taxes than below?
And as we go through this process and we settle on potential numbers that we want to use, we can show some examples of, actual assessed values and then the, outcome of a new tax rate on that property value. Does that make sense? All right, thank you. So next I know I've talked, is that all right?
Sure. Go ahead.
I know we've talked about this at many council meetings, but we have been working with a group of youth students from the Biden School who have been looking at the revenue that we currently receive and potential opportunities to expand that or other solutions that they may have for us. I'll let them further introduce themselves.
I'm not sure that mic's on, so you may want to check it. It should have a green light when it's ready,
Okay.
and you have to kind of speak right into it, so. And that helps not only the people in the room, but we record the session, so it helps to have a better recording. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Jillian. I am a public policy student from the University of Delaware. And
My name is Elena Ream. I'm also a public policy major from our Capstone group.
I'm Jaden Gross, also a public policy major. This is Capstone Group.
Hi, I'm Maureen Stone. I'm also a public policy major with this Capstone Group.
Welcome. Thank you for your work.
we're gonna just start with a brief introduction. We first wanted to kind of outline our goals and objective of our project. So our first objective was to propose just some sustainable revenue strategies to reduce the reliance on the unrestricted reserve fund. And then also develop actionable and reliable recommendations for increasing the city revenue while maintaining fiscal responsibility and of course, public approval. We wanted to focus on evaluating the annual budgets, audits, and financial statements across multiple fiscal years. And then compare the selected revenue streams to similar municipalities so we could see how other places solve similar issues. And then we analyze trends in key revenue sources such as property taxes, business license, and permit fees. And then analyze the ongoing use and projected trajectory of the unreserved restricted fund. And then this is just an overall breakdown of the current unreserved fund balance from this year, and it goes all the way up to 2033. And here we just wanted to point out that the town currently collects less revenue than it incurs in expenses, and as a result, we are drawing down the unreserved balance, which you might all know. And then the fund balance will be depleted in 2029 if no changes are made. Our goal tonight is to avoid this from happening with our options.
May I ask a question? Did you presume in making this projection that in future years we would withdraw the same amount as we did for this current fiscal year?
Yes,
Which was
I would.
higher.
Yes.
I mean, we've been withdrawing from the reserves for the past at least 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
But the amounts have gone up and down.
Yes.
So you didn't use an average, you used just what we took this year,
Yes, the one point,
the 1 point,
yes, the 1.259.
right, okay, thank you.
And I have a question, sorry, not to stop you in your tracks, but if you can just go back to the balance for 2025. What number did you use there? I'm just curious because I think currently we have over 9 million in our savings. So just curious kind of how did you derive this number? It would be great. No.
With Antonia's help and coordinates, we used a number that took the, I think it was, I'm gonna go off the top of my head, about $8 million, and then we subtracted out the amount of funds that were gonna be needed to use to finish out the year. And I think there was a market reserve and some funds that were being, call it, set aside for, I don't know if it was ARPA or what, but so we came up with it, I think it was like 4.2 million. So even though you see that other number, there were some, what would you call it, restricted contingencies for the money to be used, so we just used that it was like about 4.2 million.
And just last question, thank you so much. Did you add in the revenues anticipated in the meantime as well? So I know that's accounting for expenditures, but did you account for third payment of MSC and trustees and corporations and franchise fees?
No, we did not.
Because some of them are quarterly, so we haven't received
Because
all
I
of
think we have
them for
about
the
5
year.
million collected right now.
No, this was just making the assumption that you had money left to set aside for specific contingencies,
Mhm.
and that we were going to use 1.259 million every year, so we kind of just subtracted it down.
Mhm.
And so that's basically all that is a drawdown of the current funds that you're using for the unreserved fund right now.
When I was working with them, they used the numbers based off, sorry. We used the numbers based off, February's, because March wasn't approved yet by council. And we just assumed that the budget would continue to be 7, whatever it is now, million. We took out ARPA and we took out the remaining amount to finish the year, as in we did not collect the remaining revenues that
Okay,
is
so this should theoretically be closer to 6.5 million right now, so maybe depletion goes later in effect 2030. Just kind of
It could,
rough estimate.
but, yeah.
So if I'm,
Yeah, I don't know.
if I'm understanding correctly, you took out the projected expenditures for the balance of the year, but you did not add back in the projected income for the balance of the year.
Correct.
So this is a pessimistic projection.
Right,
In that
because
sense.
we know that we have to finish
Is that
off the
correct?
expenses, but we're not sure if we're actually gonna.
Yes, that's correct.
correct.
And also, some of the income was it's indeterminate. We don't know how much you're gonna get in permit fees.
Well, no,
things
that's
like
right.
that, yeah. So it's not, as I look at it, it's like a snapshot in time. It might be pessimistic, but it does show you a trend.
Well, yeah, I just was trying to understand where the numbers came from, not being critical.
No, that's a good question. Thank you.
While we were reviewing your tax revenues, we also looked at comparable municipalities, also in the Delaware region. So you can see behind you, we looked at a number of different cities. Every city that I spoke to is also having some sort of financial crisis where they are reevaluating their tax rates, whether they have already taken steps to do so, or they are still considering it for the future. You can see that a couple of cities have recently increased their rates. Like Smyrna, I know that they have doubled theirs and they're going to continue to do so to try and increase their revenues. There's also a bit of an outlier with Ellesmere. They have a base tax rate as well as a dissident tax rate. What the base is that refers to every residence that is being occupied on the property, like whether that is an apartment building or a home that rents out a like room over a garage, something like that. So both base tax rates are applied, plus then the tax rate of the total property assessment value. But so we found that Newcastle does not have the highest tax rates, nor do they have the lowest, but you are among your peers and reevaluating your finances currently and trying to figure out how to move forward to make sure that your city maintains self-sufficient.
Do you know any of the impact from Smyrna almost doubling their tax rate?
I have not. I spoke to one of their financial managers and they said that it was a very long process to determine their tax rates, but they did not mention any specific protests from the residents.
And they don't have any final county assessment numbers either, right?
No, yeah.
And well,
And they doubled their tax rate last year.
right,
Yeah.
yes,
They're
yeah.
continuing to
Now,
explore
some of these cities,
increasing.
Dover, even Kent, Laurel, and Seaford are in Sussex, Milton's in Sussex, Georgetown's in Sussex, so the different county assessments were
Right,
done
of
at,
course.
finished at different times. So do you know if they had their new assessed values, or these are based on their old assessed values?
I am not certain of that.
Because Sussex hadn't been reassessed since 1973,
Right.
Newcastle was 83, and of course, with all the growth in the beach communities, their property values have gone up probably more than Newcastle's
Right.
county, not the city, just the state.
Right.
So, but you don't know
I'm
what
not
this is based
certain
on.
on that, yeah.
Okay,
One of our first topics we want to talk about is trash. Very exciting, I know. So the city of Newcastle's calculated average over the past 10 years is 1,920 just from landfill fees. The budgeted expense is about $145,000 a year. But this does not include additional costs such as vehicle maintenance, salaries for our staff, and then other overhead expenses tied into managing the service. And then we estimated about 2,400 households that collect trash. So these are excluding apartments that might have their own trash services, things like that. And then I just have a statistic about residents that are 65 and older, and you'll see why in the later slides. And then we have some municipal comparisons for what they do to handle their trash fees. So some municipalities handle them on a monthly basis, some do it quarterly, and some do it yearly. But these are just some numbers put out there to compare to our options. So this is our first proposal. And then also a number that you'll see up there is the 100,000. And this is just a kind of placeholder estimate for the other associated costs that we weren't able to kind of get an exact number from, because all these associated costs are little amounts that are included into other expenses. So then we have the 145 plus 100,000 as our estimated costs for trash. So our first option proposal would be a quarterly flat fee. We decided on a quarterly fee because a quarterly number is less than a yearly number. So it might lessen the blow on people noticing a new fee, and then it might seem a little less overwhelming than a monthly fee. And then here I have it broken up in options for senior discounts. We were also thinking that this might lessen the reaction from the public. So we have per quarter $26.40 for non-senior households, and then $20 per quarter for senior households. Obviously, if this is too much to implement right away, we have calculated with no senior discounts, it would be around $25 per household without a discount. And then this would generate about $240,000 of revenue per year. And then this is the second option we have here. This is similar, a quarterly fee, but it is increasing by quarter over the next 2 years. Again, to kind of just lessen the impact and the reaction on the public by seeing a lesser number at first, and then obviously increasing based off of the public reaction and the budgeting. So of course, the first year we have about 168,000 for the first year and 264 after the second year of revenue. And then here we just have our basic comparisons of the current system with option A, collecting about $240,000 of revenue. And then the second option be the current system versus the incremental fee structure, which is again 168,000 the first year and 264 the second year.
Hi, I'm gonna talk about changes to the business license structure
Can
program.
can we ask them a couple of questions about the
Oh,
trash?
sorry.
Yeah, that's gonna be better. So why would we wanna do a trash fee that would cost additional overhead for collecting, upsetting our community versus just having a little bit extra pulled from taxes?
One of the reasons why we propose this is just to look at options mostly, because if you wanted to, say, increase your taxes less, you could look at another option like this that might simply offset something that is a clear expense, and a relatively, we also talked to, Antonia about how much we think the overhead and the, administrative pull would be. They advised that it wouldn't be too much extra, but obviously this is just an option. If it seems like too much or something that would be, easier to just put into taxes, then
So let's
That's
say
what
we
you're
do
discussing.
charge a fee for trash. Now that we're charging a fee, can people opt out?
I would assume so.
Why would we have to opt out the department?
I know people that'll take it somewhere else and not have to pay it. And that-
Also, this just, oh, sorry.
I would say no, would require the residential property to get the trash service that they always talking about the city provides.
It also is an option that other municipalities have seemed to work well for them. It is not an uncommon thing to do for municipalities to charge for trash, and I'm sure many residents are fine with that. So it was kind of just a suggestion to look at.
The other thing would be if they went to a private organization, it would be much more expensive. So it would be because the cost would be so low as recommended, it would only be beneficial that they stay.
So if we did go a route like this,
Mhm.
what about bulk items that we charge extra for? Is that now
We would
included?
continue to charge extra for that.
And people are gonna think that's now included, because now I'm being charged for trash removal, you know?
I don't think so. I mean, we currently charge for bulk items. Other places where.
Oh, I know that, but I just know the residents are
Sure.
being charged for this, I should also get it.
I understand. In other places where they do charge for trash service, they also charge for bulk pickup.
I have a couple of questions, ladies. Thank you for being here tonight.
So I live in North Wilmington and I pay for my trash. I also have to pay for extra pickups. But the one thing I will say is that if you do an opt-out and people go somewhere else, you'll have what I have, is 5 different trash trucks coming up my street. So that's something I concur with Antonia, that sometimes having multiple people is not the desirable situation, and it'd be up to you to make the final decision.
So here, this is a question from Benina or the group. So if you guys have looked at what the prices are for waste management or something like just to compare to, it seems like about roughly $100 per year is what you guys are seeing your options, less with phase-in approach, but looking at both sides, so somebody can.
I can speak for my personal resident, it's more than.
Okay, like
And I have,
150, 200, sorry, just roughly, just
No.
to get a sense of
no, it's not that much, but it's not $25.
a quarter.
No.
Okay.
Now I do get bulk service included, but once again, I'm shading.
And how often are you using that bulk service?
I think the last time I put something out was maybe important.
But I want you to look at this presentation as a whole. So the students are gonna talk about all their recommendations together at the end. So just keep that in mind. I'm validating this.
Just a reminder to some folks on council who may not know, I think everybody knows this, but as part of our property taxes, the police department, trash service, leaf pickup when we can do it, and many of those other small things are included as part of our property taxes. I would see residents being more in uproar about, we pay for this as part of our property taxes, why now are we going to? And I understand these are just suggestions, so don't, why would we wanna pay more for trash pickup?
Okay, so I was looking at the business license and the fees you charge. So the one thing, it's important to remember that the city of Newcastle needs to remain competitive and follow practices in surrounding communities with a similar size to the city. And you also want to showcase the charm of the city. So we don't want to deter businesses from coming to Newcastle. The revenue has averaged about 137,000, and I apologize for the error in the slide up there, 137,000 over the past several years. There's not a lot of potential to significantly increase business revenue without adversely impacting the local businesses. And we want to keep the revenue consistent because that also helps businesses with their planning. 20% increase overall at all rate structures would generate about $24,000, and a 40% could raise up to $49,000. And this is based on no changes to the license classifications that you are currently using. When we compared municipalities such as Middletown, Ellesmere, Milton, and Townsend, most of them tended to have two rate structures. The town here with a base rate of $125. Using that as a benchmark, we evaluated the 20% and the 40% increase. A 20% increase still would keep your base rate below the 125 that we see in many other communities. These rates can be modified to meet the town's needs, and some options of making changes is maybe changing your head count, employee head counts, adding more categories above 21. You could use another system, the North American Industry Classification System, which would require a lot of change and adjustment to people. I kind of prefer keeping things the same and simple for people. You could do a gross receipts. Middletown does a gross receipts tax for retail businesses. You could also consider adding things like a contractor versus a resident license rate. So for somebody who has a contracting business in town versus somebody who comes in here just to do windows once a year. Some of the subcategories you can have can be square foot of business, number of employees you could have, you can change this. Okay, thanks. So the first proposal, it's a modest 15 to 20% or even a 40% increase. I changed it after I made that slide. You can change your rate schedule, and changing your rate schedule would be effective and have a moderately low impact on businesses. You could follow the NAICS license category, which creates subcategories. I did do a brief breakdown of the NAICS, which I don't have here, and it does look like the way you're doing it would generate more revenue than changing to a new classification system. So I'll save you the effort of looking into that. But you can look at the square foot of a business and the number of employees as subcategories. For example, you could say if somebody runs a daycare with 3 children, they get charged one rate. If they have a daycare with 7 children, there might be another rate. I mean, I've seen that in some cities. You could add a gross receipts fee, which requires some administrative oversight, so you would have to look at that. You want to be consistent and you want to see what the reception would be from your business owners. So what I was looking at here was the building and HAC permit application systems. And so if you look from 2018 up through now, your application fees have gone from 108 to 285,000, 164% increase. However, it's not something you can consistently count on because there's peaks and valleys. Like for example, this year you budgeted 200,000 and as of February, I think you'd only collected 138,000. So you can have on years and off years with this. Some of the things that impact the building application permit system is construction costs, inflation, tariffs, other economic indicators. Again, as I said, that shows the variation. To project out forward, we just used the Fed's 10-year average inflation rate of 2.2% and the end of year amounts they used, and we just projected out. So within 5 years, at a 10%, you could collect an additional 30,000, and at 20%, you could collect 60,000. But next year, if you just did it next year, you'd collect between 28,000 and 56,000, because it's not factoring in much inflation for 1 year. But due to the complexity of the permitting process and our inexperience in this area, we were unable to evaluate any individualized fees. It's a pretty complex field, and you may choose to evaluate the cost and do a local area comparison, listing the expertise of a building and permit official. Does anybody have any questions?
Besides, you said Middletown, did you see any other cities that are doing gross receipts?
There was one other, and I
County.
Johnson?
Yes, for certain types. I remember that.
It was mostly retail.
Yeah, I mean, this came up.
Oh, and just so you know, the gross receipts fee is like half of what the state charges for those businesses. There's a state gross receipts fee as well. So,
Is it only for certain businesses for the state as well?
I don't know for the state, but for Middletown, it's retail, so all retail.
They charge for all types of businesses. So if you're an insurance company, if you're a supermarket, they have different classifications for grocery receipt tax.
And did you start with 2019 because that's the last time these fees were changed, or just for some of them?
I didn't know the last time they were changed, I just.
It was
picked the date
either,
that I thought was good.
it was either in 2019 or 2020, because I just remember, because I first came on council in 2019, and I remember that's one of the early things we did, was review all the fees, the business license fees, the permitting fees, and most of them were raised, although we tried to skew them so that the impact on the smaller businesses was less. So 1 to 3 employees, I think the fee if it went up, it didn't go up by much, but then the larger firms, the fee went up more. So,
Yeah, and another option you can include, and I don't know if you already do it now, is offering some sort of, like if you go up, I'll just use a random number, 40%, you could make the residents of the town pay 20%. So you can offer differential rates based on
for
residency.
businesses outside the town and inside the town.
Yes.
And then, we're definitely not following what you told us, so the question for later. But I do personally like the gross receipt, idea, because like it kind of, as a tourist town that we are, kind of allows you for that, increase in flow of people, then, you can potentially see some sort of revenue besides just a flat business license fee that the business might be providing for that year. So that's kind of one way that, we currently are not capturing any revenue, but, so thank you for looking into that.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the things you would have to do with that is you would have to reach out to the local businesses, find out what their current, gross receipts are to, and then calculate it to see if it's beneficial to you.
Falling on my right, I have already done that, but.
So looking at the license and the permit fee, some pros are it generates revenue. Fees are generally better received than a tax. It addresses some revenue shortfall. You can use the head count or the NAICS. Both of them are modifiable to add subcategories. And other towns do add subcategories if I wanted to add that. And a trash fee is in line with other municipalities, as Jillian mentioned. Some of the cons are economic costs to the businesses and the residents. It increases the cost of services, and the revenue increase can impact the business competitivity if it's too high. And administrative oversight can be a concern. What I did here is I just took the total funds from the end of the year report, created a pie chart for the year 2025, just to show you where the various funds are coming and what percent they are. Our property tax is 47%, the business fees are about 1.9, and the building fees are 2.3. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of areas that you have or we could evaluate. So I know you have the MSC and you have the trustees. Those are things that are outside of our purview. But you are using 19%. It came from the unrestricted last year. I realized the year before it was a little less, but with some of the things that you instituted last year, my anticipation is that you would probably need the similar amount of money to pay for some of the costs that you incurred last year that made you have to use the 1.259.
Just a question, it says here budgeted funds, but it says 9 months. So is this actual expenditures as of February? Just curious.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Would you just give us one?
Can we,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask Courtney and Antonina this question. My assumption was that unrestricted gets used last, basically, so I'm seeing here 90% in actual.
That's just showing how it's funded.
This is 1.2 here added in this pie chart.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
This is similar to the pie chart, except it looks at the years 2020 through 2025. Of course, 2025 is a little lower because it's not a full year. And you can see the property tax has been the same, which you all know you haven't raised taxes in a long time. And I apologize for the color differentials. It looks better on my computer at home, but the second box down on the last three is your unreserved fund. And you can see that it was a lot lower in 23 and 24, and you had to use significantly more in 2025. But that just shows you the trend has not changed a whole lot. There's some ups and downs for the transfer tax due to real estate Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, we made a somewhat strategic decision last year when we were doing the budget, because about taking money from the unrestricted reserves, because we knew that this reassessment was coming. And we contemplated changing the tax rate, but then we thought, we don't know what's gonna happen with the reassessment. So we decided, we wouldn't put the city in financial jeopardy by taking more in 1 year and then wait to see how the reassessment shakes out and then move forward from there. So, we certainly don't anticipate continuing to draw down at that rate.
And that's what we hope we'll be presenting to you would be options for you to come up with alternative methods without maybe raising the taxes a little bit less, and finding some other ways to make money. At the end of the day, it's funds in, so where it comes from, yes, matters to different people. And the next slide. All right, so this slide might be a little confusing, but basically we started out with that you would have the same amount of unreserved balance. And if you look at the blue line, tax rate of $1.20 per $100 of assessed value, you can see that it runs out around 2029. And the red line, which is a tax rate of $1.68, also seems like it's not gonna run out, but there's also future considerations and costs. You may have some contractual and some salary obligations and capital equipment and purchases that we did not factor in here. So this is, like I said, like we said before, a snapshot in time. There's a tax rate of $1.74, which seems to solve many of the problems, but it's also a higher tax rate. And the last one is a step increase of $1.68 and $1.70. And when we did that one, we just made the decision to do 3 years because we really can't project out much more until you'll have a better idea once you see your full budget. So it was gonna be 168 for 3 years, and then after 3 years, you would reevaluate again, and you could raise it to $1.74 or not.
And these are all based on current assessed values, is that right?
These are all based on current assessed values.
Yeah, so that's what I mentioned earlier, we're gonna look at the students' projections, and then once we finalize our rollback rate, then we'll adjust these projections, to continue our conversation at future meetings.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. I'm here to talk about the property tax rate. And right now, as you all know, Newcastle's property tax rate is $1.20, or a rate of 0.012 per $100 of assessed value. That generates around 3.18 million annually, which supports over half of the city's 5.7 million general fund, which we deducted by taking out certain, which they all preface. But the assessed property value of around 260 million hasn't grown and isn't growing significantly. So the revenue base is relatively flat, meaning that there is no additional revenue sources coming in or changing the property tax rate. Meanwhile, the city's costs are increasing due to inflation, infrastructure needs, and service demands. If more revenue isn't generated, there is a risk of drawing down the unreserved fund, which we demonstrated earlier, which puts the city in a financially vulnerable position. Essentially, keeping the rate where it is today is unsustainable long-term. And here I explored how the revenue at different increase rates without factoring unrestricted funds and expenses would look. So this chart shows how much additional revenue or deficit the city would experience under different property tax rates. And for example, the first one that I explored, which would be the smallest amount, was 3%. And the city would still be operating with a deficit of over 1.1 million. As we move toward a 40% or 45% increase, which would be the 168 and 174, we start breaking even or gaining surplus, with a 45% yielding over 200,000 in additional revenue, which would hopefully replenish the unreserved fund. This clearly illustrates that modest increases won't be enough, and the city needs a more substantial change to close the gap. Next slide. And then here I compared over a 5-year period what the unreserved fund would look like with the two 40% and 45% rates, so the rate of 1.68 and the rate of 1.74. And as you can see, a rate of 1.74 for the assessed value is preferable. It will cover the deficit that we aim to replenish at a much faster rate. And we also looked at comparable property tax rates in surrounding jurisdictions. And even with a 45% increase, Newcastle's proposed rate of 174 remains competitive and still lower or on par with nearby municipalities. This would not only help us justify the increase while addressing community concerns about affordability or regional fairness, but it's also just good to know. And this also, it just means that the city has room to adjust the rate without becoming uncompetitive to comparable municipalities. Next slide, please. And then here it is compared again. I thought this would kind of make it a little easier. So on the blue line, you can see a rate of 40% over 5 years, and then a rate of 45%. So a rate of 40% does bring you, or 40% more, so 1.68, brings you over where you need to be, but not substantially. So if any unforeseen costs do come up, you really wouldn't have a pillow to fall on if something happens. And a 45% increase over 5 years would much faster kind of give you that, which is good.
Here's a question.
Yeah, of course.
This is all high level. This is great. But I need to see how it's gonna impact the household in this neighborhood.
No slides of that.
We have coming.
Look at the last.
Okay, I'll wait.
Well, thank you. But so simply at a 40% increase or the rate of 1.68, you would, the total revenue of the property tax would bring in 4.243 million over 5 years, and you would have additional revenue of 1.06 million, and the break-even amount, so the additional revenue per year would be 44,302. For a 45% increase, you would have the new rate of 1.74, an estimated revenue of 4.612 million, with additional revenue being 1.43 over 5 years. And there would be a surplus of 200,393 per year, and that just improves your unreserved fund stability greatly. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I thought of a possible 3-year plan that you could increase the rate gradually. So it would be financially responsible and publicly palatable for your community, and it would reach the target rate of 1.74. And the goal is to eliminate the structural deficit while allowing residents and businesses time to adjust. So in year 1, you would do a 15% increase, getting you to a rate of 1.38. This would reduce the deficit by approximately 381,000, but the city would still be operating at a projected deficit of about 751,000. So this allows you to begin closing the gap while signaling the direction that you're headed. In year 2, you would raise the rate about 30% to a rate of 1.56. That would bring you closer to the fiscal balance, reducing the deficit to about 273,000. And then in year 3, you would go to the 1.74 to get you where you would need to be and generate a surplus to hopefully replenish unrestricted, unreserved funds. This phased approach balances fiscal responsibility with community sensitivity and allows time for outreach and education while steadily improving your financial position. And it's a plan that reflects both urgency and prudence. So I'm gonna go over my overall recommendations. You should raise the tax rate from 1.2 to 1.74, 45% increase to meet projected revenue needs. The reasons for this increase is the existing tax revenue of 3.18 million, I'm sorry, is insufficient to sustainably support the city's general fund and maintain financial stability. Growing expenses and inflation-adjusted deficits require new revenue streams to avoid service cuts or fund depletion. The new tax rate would generate an estimated $203,393.50 annually based on current assessed property value of $260 million. This adds $1,016,976 in new revenue over 5 years, strengthening the unreserved fund. It is still competitive regionally, remaining below or comparable to many nearby jurisdictions, and a gradual increase would be phased in over 2 to 3 years to reduce resident burden. So the overall recommendation is you should increase it by 45%.
So looking at all of that, we can see behind you, that is the current revenue streams that you're receiving, and the total proposed, or the total that you have been making yearly. Our minimum proposal, which just looks, we're trying to keep like trash fees, business fees as less as possible, keeping property taxes at our lowest recommendation. Those are your proposed outcomes of having increased property taxes and then an increased total revenue. You can also see that we have our maximum proposal. So if you increased taxes and fees to our highest recommendation, as well as increasing property taxes as quickly as possible, as high as possible, as we recommended, you can also see those proposals. So, sorry. Go next. So this is a similar slide to the last. It shows minimum proposals for trash being $13 a quarter, business is 20%, permits being 10%, and tax rate of 1.68 for every $100 evaluation. But then our maximum proposal for trash is $26 a quarter, business fees increase 40%, permits 20%, and tax rate of 1.74 per $100. So these rate increases can be gradually added in as the town reevaluates their revenue needs. We understand that in the coming years, you're gonna have to reevaluate a lot of your municipal contracts, like union contracts. We know that you recently had to do first responders and that you have more coming up soon. So these are easily adjustable to ensure that you're still able to provide all the necessary services and pay for labor that is happening in the city. So in this graph, we can see the current assessed value, and using the Newcastle County property search, we were able to look at specific tax bills at various rates. Below in the chart uses the average assessed value of $972,220.60, and we calculated the tax rate at each of these. So the average assessed value at $1.20, excuse me, is $1,166, so that's the average current tax rate. If we look at the minimum that we suggested of 1.68, then the average becomes 1,633. And if we look at the highest of 1.74, then it becomes 1,692 at the average assessed value. Again, we know that your assessments are changing and that you'll have to reevaluate these based on what your new county audits are, as well as what the rollback rate of the current 1.20 tax rate is. But these are numbers that you can work off of. If you roll back the 120, you can roll back the same way for the other ones to get the new determinations. But this is looking at how residents are going to be specifically affected to ensure that there's no too high of a tax burden for the average resident in your town. And finally, your city is running out of money. That is the largest conclusion that we have come to. This town provides such important services for all of its citizens. Unfortunately, it will be necessary to increase taxes. It may also be necessary to increase fees or business licenses, permits, things of that nature, to be able to continue to work with your citizens and provide the services that they all rely upon. We know that your unrestricted fund is dramatically decreasing. You will not be able to be prepared for any sort of emergencies or any emergencies that happen in the future, like we saw with 2020. We know that your city was prepared with a large unreserved balance, able to meet any demands that your citizens were having. We want to be able to ensure that you still have that in the future. We also recommend that you look at having new requirements for your unrestricted balance to ensure that you always have at least a minimum. Other cities have done this to ensure that their city doesn't pull too much each year. And if it does, then that means that it's time to reevaluate any sort of tax rate or any permits. That can be a good contingency for the future. Also looking at fees and licenses, we recommend putting in any sort of new fee schedule onto a public website if you determine any of those. Posting fee schedule, letting residents know why it's necessary, how much their taxes, how much their fees will be increased, and evaluate permits by professionals to determine comparable fees to surrounding towns, because of course you want to stay competitive, you want to ensure that you're not losing any businesses. But ultimately, our largest recommendation is that you do increase property taxes to one of the rates that we recommended, and the supplemental trash fees and business permits. Those are just additional recommendations if you wanted to ensure that you have a little extra cushion, but all of these determinations are obviously left up to you and your citizens who you know best. But this is what we were able to find through all of our research. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all. It's always good to have a fresh set of eyes look at things.
Take any additional questions as well. Wherever you guys want to start.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is a great, I think several people already mentioned, this is a great kind of a brain teaser for all of us because we're in the midst of this process as it is. There's a lot of things that we're considering as a city. So it's great that, we have some research already done. My first question was about, have you guys looked at property transfer taxes? Because that's our second highest revenue source. I know they're more complicated, but just curious if you guys, I've seen something in other places that try to avoid using and relying on that because of the volatility of it. And also I've seen cities where not only that, they're not counting for much property transfer tax in future, like they're projecting it because there's not much new land to go about as well. So those are some of the things that, that I'm thinking, and I'm sure my colleagues as well. So just curious if you guys came across that.
I did actually. I had a friend who's a real estate agent, and I was under the impression that she told me that the property transfer tax rate is set by the state. I don't know and so she's talking about non-incorporated areas. I don't know if you are allowed to raise that in the town. That would be a legal question.
I'm more interested if you guys are looking at it as a more of a impact in the revenue side. It's more, because we used to collect, I don't know, $200,000 one year and then 500 the other, 700 others. So it's more like
It's not stable.
yeah, it's not a stable sort of revenue. So impacts your projections even more, I guess is what I'm saying, in a sense of who that you're looking at.
So I was the one who did all the property tax stuff. I did not look into property transfer tax because it is not necessarily a reliable source of revenue. It is something to take account for, but when we were doing all of our calculations, we wanted to find reliable sources of revenue that you could kind of count on. And so that increasing certain things would be a stable way of replenishing that reserve fund opposed to maybe you get lucky one year or something.
Yeah, that's the idea, not have that ability.
And to add on that unreliability, the business permitting, or not the business, the building permitting fees do seem to have up and down years, so you can't say, oh, at least your business fees are pretty stable, you've got like 600 some odd businesses, and you're gonna be collecting X number of dollars from them. But when people decide to do construction or not based on their personal finances, that's gonna impact that particular revenue stream.
Yeah, I think we're already underway with some of the things that you guys are, recommending and think we have in front of us. We introduced last month, Councilperson Madaway and myself, stabilization fund, like that, basically that's what you guys recommended, one of your things, so. So that's trying to look at that, volatility of some of the revenue sources, but also replenishing, trying to put money into the capital fund and, stabilization fund so that it forces you kind of to look at the, revenue sources and expenditures as well, because first job of ours is to make sure expenditures are, and services required appropriate, right? So we are able to cut first before we raise any sorts of taxes and fees. Now I just want to say thank you guys. I think there's a lot for us to kind of chew on here personally. But yeah, I appreciate the insights, so I'm gonna pass on to Nina in future with further insights in this.
Thank you for giving us the time to speak tonight.
Oh, thank you all very much.
It's a good experience learning about town budgeting.
Thank you guys. Wonderful.
Thanks.
See you this semester.
Yeah, good luck the rest of the semester and whatever you guys choose to do afterwards.
I just wanted to, just reiterate and say thank you all for your presentation and time. I know this wasn't an easy undertaking. Secondly, I would like you to know that your country, your state, your local municipalities need you all. You all are our future, continue to do what you're doing. I would love to get your instructors' contact information to personally thank them. And then hopefully, we cannot pay you, but hopefully we can arrange for a catered lunch in the various places in New York. But thank you.
Thank you so much.
Anything else? Okay, then, are there any comments from the public on agenda items? The usual, please sign in. You have 3 minutes.
And yes.
I don't think
Just speak into the mic. You can turn it or whatever. Thank you.
I guess you shouldn't be totally surprised why we're here in this situation right now and why you're being defensive and surprised. If it wasn't for them, you would not have any idea about financing. I don't know what background you have, but it's shown. You've not listened to Councilman Madaway or Nerm to the suggestions that were made repeatedly for creative financing. This budget that we're in the middle of was haphazardly put together. Just because you have a certain amount of revenue does not mean every cent of it has to be spent on expenditures. This year alone, I pulled through FOIA requests, comments that I made 1 year and 2 years ago. And they've supported the fact that our budget is $150,000 this year alone, money that was spent on overages and unnecessarily spent. As Councilman Mataway has repeatedly tried to do, be more creative with revenue. I feel the contract negotiations were a farce. They could be supplemented by other sources of revenue, whether it's tickets, parking meters. But you keep saying, well, to keep good health, we have to spend an obscene amount of money. Well, I think there could have been more diligence and a stronger backbone by council to achieve the same goals of having the fine police and firemen that we're lucky enough to have. It's up to you. You could do what you want, but you've been repeatedly told that the money that we have in reserve will not last forever. And I think these fine individuals have hopefully made a bell ring that now you realize this is the day, this is the budget that we're up against, and that day has come. Try and think back and remember what I've said over the years. The main thing is you've continued, and I'm going back to 2019, 2020, I've said it, and Ms. Souter, you know I've said it. You cannot continue to kick the financial can down the road and not have Judgment Day arrive. Well, unfortunately, you kept kicking it, and Judgment Day is here. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, anything else, Ms. Tantia?
Sorry, no, we're going to proceed with, the budget meetings as presented, so we'll see you.
So we'll
next
have
week.
a first draft projected fiscal 26 budget at our meeting next week.
Next, yes, and that meeting will be at the place
Okay,
at 6:30.
all right, thank you.
Could I just ask something of City Administrator?
Mhm.
I was just keeping my comments about that until later because I was trying to get students to present first for the sake of time. We talked in separate meeting about potentially putting Excel spreadsheet out
Yes.
for residents to look up their parcel number or address to kind of figure it out. I know this is not final number, so I want to preface my comment by, this is very preliminary, there's 40 appeals going on, but we have a somewhat rough sense for folks, like with one of the slides talking about 0.24, rollback rate. So I guess my point here is being like, after they listen to this and several months of our conversations about, at least it's gonna be this rate, adjusted for appeals, just so people can go on the spreadsheet or the county parcel search, type in their, address, look up the new value and multiply that by 0.24. I think just to get a sense of kind of, to Councilperson Dell's point, like what is this impact for a household? So people can kind of start preparing their budget because we will start sending the bills eventually, right? I know we still are gonna sit down, figure out new fiscal year, this current fiscal year, revenues, expenditures, and projections going forward. But I think that's probably one of those things you can do by yourself right now to kind of understand you for your household. What are you looking at a minimum, I think? There's still 5 people voting here for us, on what that tax rate is gonna be in the end. But this is probably what we're looking at a minimum, so kind of 40 appeals. I think it's still not gonna move this assessed value by crazy a lot, but, just wanted to mention that. Is that
Yeah.
something that you're working on? I'm happy to help with that, the addresses.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Yes,
that's
we're
something-
certainly working on that. I just want to reiterate the rollback amount is required by the state,
Yeah.
as we are adopting, the new assessments. So we will have to adopt that rollback rate.
That's the first 2 weeks, right? We have to keep it and then.
And then maybe 15 days later, we can adopt a new rate should we need to. So yes, we will prepare that as part of the budget presentation, and we'll have that list with the parcel numbers matched with the current tax bill amount, and then the rollback rate amount. And then as we propose future tax rates, we'll update that with potential impacts.
Thank you. And my last question was, in the last meeting, we voted in to send to Dover, proposal to allow us to set different rates for different zonings. Has this gone to Dover?
Yes, so once it was
understand,
signed,
so
the resolutions were both, for the charter changes, were both sent to our state representatives. And they have prepared the legislation and then they are working to schedule that for their consideration. Should they approve it, they'll have to go back and forth within their committees and then to the full houses. Once they get through that, if it should be approved, it will then have to be signed by the governor and then we can enact that here and adopt that via the resolution. And then if we want to determine separate rates at that time, then we can do so. If it is past the time when we've already set our tax rate, we'll have to wait till next year to adopt that.
So this is going to committee first, then House, Senate,
Mhm.
and then governor. But basically what that means, they go back in session soon, I guess. This might be adopted way earlier than June 30th, but then signed by governor
Yeah.
in July. I don't know when.
Yeah,
exactly.
it just depends. I've had experiences with a former governor where, of course, it was the charter change was adopted by the House and the Senate prior to June 30th, because that's before their session ends, but it wasn't signed until the governor, by the governor until August. And that was after a lot of pushing to get it
Yeah.
signed. So there could be delays on their end with their schedule that unfortunately may not get to us in time for this year.
Okay, I see. So that was kind of, the reason I'm asking the timeline is, A, we could have some indication before June 30th. that
Yes.
It's either something that committee, House and Senate had voted on in our favor, let's say. And now it's just the governor vetoing it or not. But you don't think necessarily it's something we should count for as we're sitting down and these
Yeah.
meetings to, as a tool.
I think
Is that correct?
as they go through their process, I'll provide you updates as I'm aware of them. If I feel like it's gonna be completed sooner rather than later, I'll certainly indicate that to you, but I don't know for sure that that would be possible.
Is there a letter we can write to governor, legislators, explaining the urgency and
Yeah.
timeline, like just various, about member body.
I would think the first step is to get it passed by the legislature.
Correct.
And then perhaps we can work through our representatives to encourage the governor to sign it promptly, should it be approved by the legislature.
Right.
Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Anyone else? Is there a motion to adjourn? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Yes.